physical realm. Okay, because this book wasn't given just so we can sit and wonder, what it was all about. There's some real spiritual guidance that we can get. And so let's consider that. I think to start, last week we covered something so quickly, I doubt you remember a lot about it. Okay, I think we had 20 minutes, so let's go ahead. I want to start out tonight with looking at the charge. That's one of the major hinges in the book. I believe it divides the units in the book. You always hear about Pastor Sen talking about the chiastic structure. Well, I believe that the units are divided by this charge that's there, the chorus of the book. And that would be, we're going to look at Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 7. That was one of the charges. I've been working on a devotional book for Song of Solomon for a while, and I've done a devotional on each. I'm only in chapter 2. Chapter 1 is done. 2 is about halfway done. But devotionals for this. So I thought I'd share one. I've never shared any of my devotionals from Song of Solomon, but I'll read this one because it explains kind of a little bit more about it. Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verse 7, I charge you, O ye daughters of Jerusalem, by the roes and by the hinds of the field, that you stir not up, nor wake my love till he please. I charge you. It's a strong admonishment given to the daughters of Jerusalem by the Shulamite, the bride. Listen carefully and take heed is the message. By what authority does she give such a charge? By the roes and by the hinds of the field? It does not seem at first thought to be very authoritative. In her society, these shy female animals were very common. They were also known to be swift and beautiful as they moved upon the mountains or the high places. It would be easy to imagine Shulamite raising her graceful hand and pointing, to the hills around Jerusalem as she spoke about the gentle roes and the alert hinds of the field. Remember, they are God's creation, ready to react to anyone that dare disturb their tranquility in the fields. When Shulamith charged the daughters of Jerusalem by referencing elements of God's creation, she is giving a veiled allusion to the Creator himself and to his authority. So what is so important to Shulamith that she speaks in this poetic way? It is that physical love is not to be stirred up until the right time. Perhaps in your translation, the words my and he are in italics, meaning these words were added by the translators for better readability. A stilted reading would be, nor awake love till it please. Very different from our American culture today, this verse is saying that there is an appropriate time for physical love. The warning is not to stir it up before the timing is right. Without the right timing, relationships can completely fail and many may be terribly hurt in the process. It's easy to make a long list of very problematic things that can occur as a result of a sexual relationship beginning at the wrong time. But even more important is considering the heart of God. In keeping with the rest of the Bible, we understand that marriage is the right context for such a relationship. And here in the Song of Songs, we're given a very clear warning. So this is an extremely helpful and instructive charge, not just for the daughters of Jerusalem, but for people everywhere in every generation. It alerts and places what should be a guard in the heart of love-struck individuals. The right course of action and behavior is not to intentionally stir the sexual desires in another person, particularly someone you love. Exercising and learning restraint will help build the character needed in being loyal and true to only one person. Unbridled physical attraction can have very sad physical and emotional consequences. And then you can go to Ephesians 2:1, to everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under the heavens. And so Song of Solomon is very much as we look at the intimacy that's attached with Song of Solomon, it is carefully guarded. by the chorus of the book. It's saying there is a time, and that's right and good. I'm going to move this out so I can have a little more space. So with that, I just want to mention chapter 3 is, we talked about some things last week, but chapter 3 is the wedding procession. Chapter 4 is the honeymoon night. We'll talk about that. And the consummation of their wedding or their honeymoon night is in chapter 5, verse 1. And that's very, very significant. I remember when I first studied this, and I didn't know what a chiastic structure was, but I noticed that the consummation of their marriage was at the very center of this book. So union is at the chiastic center. Now I know the word. I didn't know it then. Okay, but it's a very significant thing. It's the message of this book. It's union and communion. And so that's a very important thing to remember. So I think with that, we're going to go ahead and start in. And I want you, as we go over these lessons or these thoughts, that you would consider what are the spiritual principles brought forth from the physical realm. So let's go ahead. And I mentioned last week, the very first verse of this book is really amazing. Verse 2, actually, the first one, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. It's saying this is who wrote it. And that's part of the text. It's not like a psalm that has the little line up above that other people may have put in at later times. This is part of the text, the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. And then let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for thy love is better than wine. The desire that's in the heart right then. And we talked about desire last week, but we did talk about it. Okay. And then we're going to jump over to the honeymoon night. Will's the one who asked me to talk about intimacy in the Song of Songs. And so here in chapter 4 is the honeymoon night, but there's some things that we can learn from this. Verse 12, let's just look at that for a moment. A garden enclosed is my sister, my spouse, a spring shut up, a fountain sealed. And I want to point out here that Solomon is using very veiled language in this chapter through chapter 4, first part of chapter 5. If you were to go to Ecclesiastes 12, let's look that up real quick. You'll see the same author trying to do the same thing. When it comes to a very sensitive topic, he addresses the topic of, and I'm going to have you fill in the blank. I'm trying to get to Ecclesiastes. I should have marked it in my Bible. Okay, Ecclesiastes chapter 12. If you want to go and look at verses, let's start 3. Actually, no, the year's done. Let's start with verse 1. I'll read it. Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened, nor the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house shall tremble, and the strong men shall bow themselves, and the grinders cease, because they are few, and those that look out of the windows be darkened, and the doors shall be shut in the streets when the sound of the grinding is low, and he shall rise up at the voice of the bird, and all the daughters of music shall be brought low. I'm reading from the King James. Also when they shall be afraid of that which is high, and fears shall be in the way, and the almond tree shall flourish, and the grasshopper shall be a burden, and desire shall fail, because man goeth to his long home, and the mourners go about the streets. Or ever the silver cord be loosed, or the golden bowl be broken, or the pitcher be broken, the fountain or the wheel broken at the cistern. Then shall the dust return to the earth as it was, and the spirit shall return unto God who gave it. So what's Solomon talking about? That's right. He's talking about old age. He's taking a very sensitive topic and he is using veiled language to, what are the grinders? Teeth. You know, and you can go through this whole thing, and that's not our purpose tonight. But I wanted you to see that this is the same author, okay, who's writing the Song of Songs. So here we're in Song of Solomon. And so he's going to be very, very careful about the way he handles the relationship between a man and a woman. A young person could pick up a Song of Songs and it would not be offensive because of the way he wrote this book. The beautiful language that he uses and how he works with this. But tell you what, so he's using very veiled language and he's dealing with old age here, but he's dealing with the one flesh relationship in chapter 4, also chapter 7 of the Song of Solomon. So it is very sensitive. And in chapter 7, it's not quite as veiled. He does come out and mention the parts of the body, but he's very, very careful about the way he does it. What lesson can we gain from just knowing that much about Song of Solomon and the way he handles this subject? Can you think? What can you learn from that lesson alone? What's happening in our culture today when the topic of sensuality comes up, sexuality? It becomes what? Very
commonplace. People just talk about what
deceitful.
Commonplace, sometimes
Worldly.
Deceitful, worldly. What else would you say? It's very vulgar, cheap.
Yeah, very cheap.
Okay, the way everyone discusses it. But here Solomon is using careful language. That should tell us that as we speak to others about these sensitive things, the thought of vulgarity should not be among us. We should not be vulgar in the way we talk about these things. So here in this passage, chapter 4, if you carry on, read through it, he's leading up to the consummation. We're on verse 12, and it's just a matter of 5 verses later. He's talking about the consummation of their marriage. And he also says that she is a spring shut up, a fountain sealed, in verse, verse 12. So what's he actually saying here? If she is his garden, as this garden talk is happening, and the use of a garden here, spring shut up, a fountain sealed, what's he saying about her? She's a virgin. She hasn't given herself to another man. She's a spring shut up. No one has come into this woman. And he's saying that in this type of language. Only the owner of the spring and the fountain may enjoy her pleasures. And this is why we understand that this is a description of their first night together. It speaks well of Solomon and it speaks well of the bride here. And I'll just read out of a study I wrote. To have this close physical relationship expressed as a garden should not surprise us. It was in the Garden of Eden that God first had fellowship with Adam and Eve. Jesus often retired to the Garden of Gethsemane. It was in the Garden of Gethsemane where Jesus agonized over his crucifixion, was ministered to by angels. Our heavenly bridegroom was buried and resurrected in a garden. And you can follow that garden theme through the Bible. So a couple things then. The bride of Solomon, she's what we've read, started out, she has no spot or blemish. She's a pure bride. She's a virgin. And so what's the application there? What can we learn from that fact as we read this? What can that tell us? We should strive to be what? In heart and mind, body, pure. And sometimes In life, there are failures, but the application here is that we should strive to be pure always. Does that just is that just before marriage? No, it's after marriage. Sometimes, you can have a mind that is a gutter, okay, or you can get involved in pornography or that kind of thing. Um, but the application for us is that we should strive to be pure in every way toward our husbands. Um, Another thought here is that desire and passion is healthy and good with the right safeguards when you're heading toward marriage. Um, what would you have without desire? I've mentioned this before too to some of our classes. That's a really important thing in a marriage, to be desired, to know the other person desires you. Because without desire, you have what? Apathy, lukewarmness, half-heartedness. Okay, and so that's a tough thing if you're in a marriage and you're feeling like someone doesn't desire you. Security doesn't come in, all the objects that are around us or even our responsibilities. Security in a relationship comes when you know that person desires you, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's go on to 413. Thy plants are an orchard of pomegranates with pleasant fruits, campfire with spikenard and saffron, calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh and aloes, with all the chief spices. 415. A fountain of gardens, a well of living waters, and streams from Lebanon. This guy's extreme. The plants in this garden are fragrant, exotic, and expensive. The garden described is filled with many, many fragrant trees and plants. It is surely a statement that all of his senses were being filled with beauty and delight. It's not just a singular pomegranate tree he refers to, but an orchard. There was not just a tree of frankincense, but all trees of frankincense, not just a few spices. It's said to have all the chief spices. So this isn't a single garden, but a fountain of gardens. Other gardens will come from this one. Everything is plentiful and overwhelmingly filling the senses. So what can we learn, our spiritual guidance, from this physical realm? What would you take from that? Got a couple things. Of course, I've thought about it before you did. Okay,
Well,
go ahead, Sue.
One is just like our worship can be a pleasing aroma to God.
That's
So
right.
Just all these, it's a very visual picture of just like some incredible mixture of smells, and
Yes,
just that our worship, and maybe even more so when we're together and
right.
we're all worshiping, and each person is sending up their own flavor. It's got to be really pleasing
Right.
to the Lord.
Right, in the tabernacle, right, there was the altar of
Mhm.
incense, and that was the prayers of the saints
Yeah.
going up. Good thought there. Someone else? Anything else? What can we learn?
It
Anyone?
kind of describes a desire to read God's word and be closer to him, draw closer to him, and he'll draw closer to you.
Very true. As far as our desire, what the book of James teaches us, that's right. But I'd like us to learn something here too. And I feel like you folks here, I think looking at everyone, you've been married a while. Okay, so it's not like this is new territory. I feel like this would be better for maybe younger ladies at times, but I have always been encouraged when I come back and look at these truths. I think, number one, you have to understand the greatness of your physical being and the wonderful satisfaction it can bring to your husband, to enjoy you as a person. That this is not a small thing. It's a great thing that God created, God made, is the union between a husband and wife. Also this, you're the only person that can satisfy your husband in that physical way. So that's an amazing thing. You can think of, outside of marriage, that's all wrong. Okay. So as you relate to your husband, you are the only one in God's eyes that can bring this blessing to your husband. And how does that relate in marriage? What happens when you're miffed? What happens when you want to shut the gate on the garden? Okay. As we see in chapter 1, chapter 5, verse 1, I'm coming to my garden, my sister, my spouse. And he's got it right. Now he's calling her spouse. You don't see that except in verse 8. Come with me from Lebanon, my spouse. So they've entered the honeymoon night. They're married. And you see that word. But he is claiming ownership. I've come into my garden. You belong to me. And if we look in the New Testament, you'll see that they belong to each other. And this is a really precious thing. But when someone gets married, I feel like in today's world, we have people who are living on parallel tracks. They want to get married and be married, but that idea of belonging to one another, I'm not sure that it's there, where I belong to you and you belong to me. Literally, you're giving another person access to your body, and there aren't any restrictions. Okay, that takes maturity. There may be times you don't want someone touching your body. You don't want to comply to all the biblical standards